Well, shalom, Hevre. Here we are on a journey embarking to learn Biblical Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew, the language in which God chose to write the Old Testament and which God used His men to compose and to leave His word for us throughout the ages. Now, as you're thinking about the Hebrew Bible, you're thinking, but I know that there's more than Hebrew. I know that there was also Aramaic. And you're right, there was also Aramaic. In this class, however, we're going to focus on Hebrew, on Biblical Hebrew, because you know that there's also modern Hebrew. And we're going to learn the elements and the specifics and the consonants and the vowels and everything that entails to being able to read the Hebrew Bible. So, here is the Hebrew Bible that I'm holding for you. By the end of these lectures, which would amount to about a year's worth of material. By the end of this year's worth of material, you should be able to read the Bible. You should be able to read it in Biblical Hebrew, in its original, the way that it was written, and you'll be able to delve into it and to be able to explore some of the riches that come from the text itself, from the words, from the sentences, from the syntax, from the grammar, all of these beautiful riches that come from studying the text in its original language. Now you may say, and you may be thinking, why am I learning Biblical Hebrew when I already have the English translation, or whatever translation it may be, the translation of your language? Why learn Biblical Hebrew? It takes so much effort. It takes so much time, so much energy, and so much time away from your family, from your friends, from doing other things. Well, there is value in learning Biblical Hebrew. Let me just say that yes, you can read the Bible in your language, and you will understand the Bible, and you will be able to get to know God, and you can get saved by reading the translation that you have before you, assuming that it's a good translation. However, there is value in studying the original languages, whether it's Biblical Hebrew, Biblical Aramaic, or Greek. In this case, specifically Hebrew. And the value comes in various ways. Take, for example, looking at the exegesis of the language. And you can think about Jonah, the book of Jonah, right? In Jonah, you remember that God gives a command to Jonah to go and to tell the Ninevites to repent. Well, Jonah disobeys God and he flees. He goes the other way. He gets on a ship and he tries to get away from fulfilling the command of God. Well, it says in verse 4 that the ship was about to break up because of the storm that God had sent in the sea in order to prevent Jonah from fleeing. Well, this expression, the ship was about to break up, is translated in a variety of ways. Sometimes it says the ship was about to break up. Sometimes it says that the ship threatened to break up. And there's a variety of other translations. Now, when you look at specifically the original language, the word that we have here, it says that the ship was chishva lehishaver. The ship was thinking to break up. It was thinking deliberately to break up. The word is chishva. And you can know this only by knowing the original language. And you see this, and you see that this fits into the rest of the book very, very theologically and tightly. You have Jonah, the man who was created in the image of God. Jonah, who is a prophet of God, he's disobeying God. And then you have various elements, the non-human, inanimate objects submitting to God. God sends the storm, and the storm submits to God. Later on in the narrative, you read that God sends the worm, and the worm submits to God. You have the fish, right? God sends the fish, and the fish submits to God. Well, in line with these inanimate objects, you have the ship. And as Jonah gets on the ship and he tries to flee from God, you have the ship thinking to break apart because it wants to align itself with the rest of the objects that are submitting to God, in contrast to Jonah, who is disobeying God. So you look at the original language and you see these details, and you see them specifically from the Hebrew that you have before you, that you know, that you understand. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get deep into the text, to delve deeply into the material that we have, that God has left for us, so that we're able to understand it in a better, in a refined, in a more precise way, so that we become more like Christ, so that we become more like God, and so that we see God's plan that He has revealed to us and that He has left for us over the generations and through His men. Well, we're going to learn biblical Hebrew, and we're going to start by learning the alphabet. And when we learn the alphabet, we're learning one of the most fundamental elements of Hebrew, but really of any language. And so what I'm going to do with you is I'm going to go through every letter, and we're going to see how these letters come together and how we read the letters, so we get the actual words that God has left for us, so that we understand what the text is saying. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And as we look at each one, I'll give some background to each letter just to see how it works. And then we'll look at some text, and then we'll look at some of the specifics about each letter in order for us to be able, ultimately, to read the biblical text. So as you can see on the screen, our first lesson is related to the Aleph Bet. Now, as you look at this, you're thinking to yourself, I can't read this right here. You can see that I'm showing this with a red little highlight, little fireball pointing to the word that we're looking at. Aleph Bet. We're going to learn the Aleph Bet. And by the time we're done with this, you're going to be able to read this, the Aleph Bet. There's 22 letters, like I said, and we'll walk through each one of them. The first letter is the Aleph. It's called the Aleph, and it is recognized as a silent letter, meaning that we don't say it. We use the vowels, which we'll learn later on, to tell us how to pronounce this letter. Now, when I say silent letter, we have a similar idea in English and in other languages as well. But in English specifically, you can think of the word honor, right? It's spelled Honor, but you don't say the H. You don't say honor. You say honor. The H remains silent, and you pronounce the the honor, based on the vowel, on the O. And it'll be similar in Hebrew. So the first letter here is Aleph. Then we go to the letter Bet. Aleph is the first, then we go to the letter Bet. And Bet is pronounced as Ba. Ba. Now, as you look at the screen, you can see that there's two letters here on the screen. One is with a dot, and one is without a dot. The letter with the dot is pronounced Ba, and then the letter without the dot is pronounced Va. We're going to look at that and the details of this a little bit later, as well as the rules as to how to determine where the dot goes and where the dot does not go, where it's left out. So we have Aleph, Bet, and then we have the letter Gimel. And as you look at this, you can also see here that there's a dot as well. So one is with a dot and the other is without a dot. And so the letter with the dot, you pronounce G, like an English G. And the letter without the dot, you pronounce G, like the letter G. So there is no difference here. Then we move on to the letter Dalet. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. As you look at this, you also see a dot in one of these letters, and then you see no dot in the second letter. And historically, you would pronounce the Dalet with the dot as D, but the letter without the dot, you would pronounce the, a little bit softer. However, you go to Israel today, and you will see that they pronounce this letter with the dot or without in the exact same way. It's always going to be D, like a hard D letter. So you have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, and then you have the letter Hey. And Hey is pronounced Ha. Ha. You have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, and then you have vav, vav. Vav is pronounced like the letter V, like V in English. So simply V, Volkswagen, V. Then we have the letter Zayin, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin. And the letter Zayin is pronounced Z, like the English Z. Now, let me just make one note here. As I look at this letter Zayin, and then if I click back and I see the letter Vav, they look very similar. So here's Vav and here's Zayin. Here's Vav and here's Zayin. You can see that they're very similar and they're easily confusable. So you have to make sure that you pay attention to the little tail here above on the Zayin to recognize this as the letter Zayin. So once again, here is Vav and here is Zayin. Now we go forward. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het. Het. And you pronounce this letter as a harder Cha. Cha. Okay? And then we'll see words as we keep going forward with this. So you have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het. And then you have the letter Tet. And the letter Tet is pronounced as a T, kind of like Tom, for example. Tet as in T, as in Tom, just as an example. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Yod. And the letter Yod is pronounced as a Ya. Ya, sometimes spelled with a Y. If you go to the German language, you will see it as spelled with a J, and that slips over into English as well. But the sound it makes is Ya. Now, this is one of the smallest letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And if you compare it to other letters, for example, here, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, then Tet, and then Yod. And you can see that Yod is just about half the size of the other letters. And we'll go forward and we'll learn these two letters as well. But as you look at these letters and as you look at this line of letters, you can see that the Yod is the upper half of the other letters, and therefore one of the smallest letters in the Hebrew alphabet. But we keep going forward. So you have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, and then Kaf. Kaf. As you look at these two letters, you can see that one of them has a dot, and then the other one doesn't have a dot. And we've seen this before. And this dot, once again, many times changes the sound of the letter. When there is a dot, you pronounce the kaf as a ka. Ka, like king, for example. When there is no dot, you pronounce the kaf as a cha. It's a rougher, it's a breathing sound. Cha. You rub the letter with your throat so that it doesn't pronounce the hard ka sound, but the rougher cha sound. And then we keep going forward. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed. Lamed. And the Lamed is pronounced as a La. And you could have guessed it. Lamed pronounced as La, just like we have the letter L in English. Now in this case, with the letter Lamed, you can see that when we compare it to other consonants, the tail above the Lamed, it goes slightly above the other letters. So you have the Kaf here, then you have the Lamed, and you can see that the tail goes above the line of the other letters. And this letter is something we'll learn in a minute. but it goes above this consonant as well. Okay, so we keep going forward. You have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, and then you have the letter Mem. Mem, as in M. You pronounce it as M, like max or market. M. All right, so we keep going forward. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, and then Nun. Nun is pronounced as the letter N. N, like Nancy. We carry on forward. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech. Samech, as in the letter S. For example, the name Sam would take a Samech if you were to write it in Hebrew. Okay, Samech makes the sound S, just like Sam. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, and then the letter Ayin. Ayin. Now this letter is interesting because it also stays silent. So how do we know how to pronounce it? By looking at the vowels, which we will learn soon enough in the next lesson. Okay, so but for now you can know that this is the letter Ayin. You remember what it looks like, you remember how to say it. Ayin, you remember how to write it, but we will know how to pronounce it based on the vowel that comes with it. So we have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ayin, Pei. And once again, you look at this and you see that there's a dot in one letter Pei and there's no dot in the other letter Pei. And by now you already know that there's going to be a different sound. When you have the dot in the letter Pei, you're going to pronounce it as Pa, like Peter. When you don't have the dot in the letter Pa, Pei, you're going to pronounce it as a softer sound, Fa. So with the dot, it's Pa, like Peter. Without the dot, it's Fa, like Philip. Pa, Fa. Both are the letter Pei. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ayin, Pei. And we move to the letter Tzadi, moving closer and closer to the end of the 22 letters. Tzadi. And the letter Tzadi pronounces like a TS in English. The sound Tsa, Tsa. You think about TS, that's the sound that it would make in English, like the letter Tsa. TS. We move forward. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ayin, Pei, Tzadi, and then Kof. The letter Kof. And the letter Kof makes the sound Ka, kind of again like king. The sound Ka. And if you look at this consonant, you will note that it is also longer than some of the other consonants. It will go beneath the line with its vertical line that is part of the letter. So you have the tzadi here, which ends at the line. And then you have the kof, and you can see that this little piece extends below the line. And then we'll learn the next letter just in 1 second. But you can see that it extends below the next letter as well. And this is something for you to remember as you memorize how do you write this letter, how do you recognize this letter when you see it printed between lines or even in a line of text. You will see that the kof the sound K goes beneath the line of the other consonants. So you have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ein, Pei, Tzadi, Kof, and then you have the letter Resh. Resh. And you could have guessed this one. The Resh is pronounced as an R, as an English R. The sound R. Okay, like rule or ruler. This would be the letter Resh, like the sound R, ruler. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ein, Pei, Tzadi, Kof, Resh. And then we have the letter Sin, Shin. It's two letters. And you can see that there's a dot here also telling us how to distinguish between them. And you'll have to remember this. When you see these two letters, you'll have to remember that one dot indicates that it's a Sin, and the other dot indicates that it's a Shin. But which one is which? So as you look at this right letter, for example, you will know that this is a Sin. How will you know? Because you will remember it. You'll just have to memorize it. So the letter that is on this right side, and you will note that the dot is here at the left of the letter, this will be the letter Sin, and it makes the sound Sa. Sa. Now, as we look at the other letter on the screen, this is the letter Shin. And here you have the dot on the right side of the letter. And this dot appearing on the right side of the letter will tell us that this is the sound Sh. It's the letter Shin, which makes the sound Sh, kind of like ship. And we have one more letter to learn. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ein, Pei, Tzadi, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, and then the letter Tav. And once again, we have the dot. And the dot tells us that it is pronounced with the dot one way, and it's pronounced without the dot a different way. With the dot, it's going to be the harder sound. Without the dot, it's going to be the softer sound, historically, right? So you look at this letter here with the dot, and it's going to be pronounced ta. So tav, the letter tav, is pronounced ta, like the English T. And as you look at the letter without the dot, the consonant tav is pronounced tha. Historically, it was pronounced tha. Now I say historically because you go to Israel today and it's going to be pronounced ta, no matter whether you put the dot or you don't put the dot. So by today, the difference in the way that you pronounce the letter has disappeared. And with this, we know the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Let me run through them one more time with you. We start with the letter Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ein, Pei, Tzadi, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, and Tav. Now, with these consonants, you think about the Bible. You think about how the Bible begins. And having learned these consonants, you can read the Bible. Can you read all of it? You can make out most of it. We're going to have the vowels that will refine and specify for us exactly how to pronounce each word, but you can already begin to read the consonants and understand what the text is saying. So if we turn to Genesis chapter 1, and I have it on the screen for us, we will see these first three words with the consonants that we just learned. Bereshit bara Elohim. And the text, of course, continues. But Bereshit, that's the first word here, Bereshit. It means in the beginning. Bara Elohim, and that means God created. Bereshit bara Elohim. Now, as we'll continue to learn Hebrew, you'll notice that, wait a minute, the verb and the noun, created and God, they're switched. They're in reverse order because literally it says, in the beginning, created God, and then the text continues, the heavens and the earth, right? But that's what the Hebrew does. It switches the verb and the noun because of the specific word order of Hebrew. However, when we translate it into English and we follow the word order in English. And so when we translate it, we say, in the beginning, God created, and we finish the sentence. Now, as you look at this, you will recognize that not all of the consonants are familiar to us, right? You will see that in the first word, bereshit, okay, we know everything. In the word bara, in the beginning, created, bara, we know everything. But then Elohim, you look at this and you say, I don't know the last letter. We haven't talked about that. Well, let's talk about that right now. The last letter and the category of last letters. These are called the final forms, or the otiyot sofiyot, the final forms of the consonants. What does the final form mean? It means that a letter that appears at the end of a word. Sometimes in English, we have words that are capitalized, and when you think about the beginning of a sentence, the letter is always capitalized at the beginning of a sentence of every word. Well, just by analogy, you have something similar in Hebrew, but in only specific cases with certain letters where the end of a word takes a different form. Similar, recognizable in a way, but still different. And that's what we want to take a look at right now. The final forms of some of the consonants. Now, what you have on the screen is the letter kaf, something that we learned, kaf. And you pronounce it as the sound ka. Sometimes it appears with the dot, other times it appears without the dot. But we're talking about its final form. And if you look at the other side of the screen, you will see that there's a different looking letter. It's still a kaf. The difference here is that it's as if the bottom, the horizontal line, was stretched out and made vertical. And so you have this vertical line with the horizontal line on top, making the letter kaf. Now, what this means is, when you see a word like melachim, you see it on the screen, it means kings. But when you see this word and you see the letter kaf appearing in the beginning or anywhere other than the end, and here in this word, it appears in the middle of the word, you use the letter kaf that is regular. However, let's say the letter kaf appears at the end of a word. Well, in that case, you change to the final form of the letter and you use the final form of the kaf. And that's why you have melachim with the regular kaf in the middle of this word. And then you have melech, which means king, with the end of the word having the letter kaf. But because the last letter is kaf, it uses the final form of the kaf. And so the bottom extends, making this final form of the kaf. So that's the letter kaf. Now, we also have the letter mem that has a final form. And there's 5 of these. So kaf is the first, mem is the second. And as you look on this side of the screen, you can see that this is the regular mem that we learned. Mem, making the sound ma, like Matthew. But as you look at the other side of the screen, you see that it's slightly different. And this is the final form of the letter mem. It's the same letter, it just makes a difference depending on where it appears in the word. If it appears in the beginning or in the middle or anywhere but the end, it's going to be the regular letter mem. And so here you have the word shamayim. The mem appears in the middle of the word. And so we use the regular letter mem. However, if this letter appears at the end of the word, then we'll use the final form of the letter mem. And you can see that this is the exact same word, shamayim, which means heavens. It has the regular mem in the middle, as you can see here and here. However, when you get to the end of the word, it's going to use the final form of the letter mem. Why? Because it's the end of the word. That's the reason for it. So you have the letter kaf, you have the letter mem. We also have the letter nun. The letter nun, which makes the sound na. Anytime that the letter appears in the word and it's any part except for the end of the word, like take the word banim. Banim means sons. Here the nun appears in the middle of the word. And because it appears in the middle of the word, we're going to use the regular nun. However, if it were to appear at the end of the word, like it does here in the word ben, which means son, singular, because it appears at the end of the word and it finishes the word, we're going to use the final form of the letter nun. So in the middle of the word, it'll be the regular nun, but at the end of the word, it'll be the final form of the nun. We have another letter, the letter pei. And as you can see on this side of the screen, it's the letter pei that we learned. It's the normal pei, if you will. And so on the other side of the screen, you have a different looking letter, but it's still a pei. And the difference is that this pei will appear at the end of the word. And once again, here you'll have this bottom stretched out, if you will, and it'll be extended, which will make it look different, but it's going to be the same letter. So, if you have this letter appearing at the beginning of a word or any other part except for the end of the word, you're going to use the regular letter pei, like the word Peleg. Peleg is the name of a gentleman who was born during the flood or around the time of the flood. But here you have the pei appearing at the beginning of the word, and therefore we use the regular letter pei. However, you put the same letter at the end of the word, and it's going to look different because it's going to use the final form of the consonant. Pei, but it's extended. So here you have Peleg, and here you have Yosef, which is my name, Joseph. But because the pei appears at the end of the word, you use the final form of the letter. All right, we carry on. We have the letter tzadi. On the right side, we see the tzadi, the letter that we have studied, that we recognize. It's familiar to us, right? But when you look at the other side of the screen, you see that this looks different. It's as if, once again, the bottom has been stretched out. You can see it right here. And the letter is a bit longer, and because of this, it looks different. Well, it's the same rules. If it appears at the beginning or any other part of the word that is not the end, it's going to be the regular tzadi. Tzaddik means righteous or a righteous one. But if you put the same letter at the end of the word, for example, like you see here in this case, it's going to take the final form. It's going to be the extended version that looks slightly different to us right now, but we're going to learn it, we're going to recognize it, and the tzadi that appears at the end of the word will be the final form of the letter. And here we have eretz. Eretz means land, and it takes the final form of the consonant. Now, you look at these letters and you're thinking, man, there's a lot of consonants. There are some differences. I gotta review these. I gotta learn these. And the answer is, yeah, you do. I mean, we have to know this so that we're able to recognize them, so that we're able to distinguish between the words. And there's a couple of other things that I want to say to help us recognize them so that we're able to read the words properly. And the next part is to look at the confusing consonant. Confusing, well, things that will help us to distinguish between the consonants so that we're able to read the words properly. So you look at these letters kaf and bet. Kaf and bet. Kaf and bet look very similar. You have kaf on this side of the screen and you have bet on this side of the screen, and you're thinking, how am I going to distinguish between these two? They look exactly the same. Well, if you pay attention and if you look at this little tail on the bottom of one of these letters, and this happens to be the letter bet, then you will know that the letter with the tail is the letter bet. And then the letter without the tail is the letter kaf. And once you put that into your memory, you'll remember that this is how you make a distinction between these two letters. Now, the letters nun and gimel also look the same. You have the letter nun on the right side and you have the letter gimel on the left side, and you're thinking, man, these look the same. True, they do. However, there is a way to distinguish between them, and it's as if there's this split hoof, right, on the gimel. Here you have the gimel on this side of the screen, and if you look at the bottom, you will see that it splits. The letter itself splits. Well, the split indicates for us that this is a gimel, so you pronounce it as a g, and if there is no split, then it's going to be a nun, and you pronounce it as the sound na. If you look at the letters resh and dalet, and you have resh here on this side of the screen and dalet on this side of the screen, they also look the same. So how do you distinguish between them? And some of you have already picked up on this. If you look at the little tail on the top of the letter dalet, it will tell us that this is a dalet. And you will know that you pronounce this as the sound da. So dalet, making the sound da, has the tail. Resh, not having the tail, pronounces the sound ra or ra. We move forward, and you can see that there are two other letters that look similar. Here on this side of the screen, you have dalet, which we just saw because it has this tail. And on the left side of the screen, very similar, it's the final form of the letter kaf. So how do you distinguish between them? Well, the letter kaf is longer. The final form of the letter kaf is longer. A vertical line will go beneath the rest of the consonants. And once you see that, you will know that, this is the final consonant kaf, and so I will pronounce this accordingly as a kha or sometimes as a ka, depending on if there's a dot or if there's no dot. Then you have these two letters which look similar. On the right side, you have the letter het, and then on the left side, you have the letter hey. How do you distinguish between them? And here also, I know many of you have already looked at this and picked up on this. There is this gap in the letter hey, and the gap appears in the left top corner. Here we go. And once you see this gap, you know that it's the letter hey, the soft ha. And if you don't see the gap, you know it's the letter het, slightly harder, ha. Now we go forward, and this is a distinction that I've already mentioned once. You see the letter zayin on the right side, and you see the letter vav on the left side, and they look very similar. So what's the difference between them? Well, on the letter zayin, you can see that the tail extends a little bit below the vertical line, and that tells us that this is the letter zayin. If you don't see the tail, you know it's a vav. So zayin you pronounce za, vav you pronounce va. Okay? Now we look at these two consonants and you will see that they also look very similar. Here on the right side you have vav, which we just saw. And then on the other side, you have the final nun. Now, how do you distinguish between these two? Well, the noon will go beneath the line of the other consonants as well. Just like the other final forms, the final form of the noon will go beneath the line of the rest of the consonants. So here you have vav, which is pronounced va, and here you have noon, the final one, which is pronounced na. Well, as you look at these two letters, on the right side you will see samech, which we pronounced sa, and on the left side we have the final form of the letter mem, which we pronounced ma. And as you look at this, you're thinking they look very similar. How do I distinguish? Well, in this case, if you look at the right bottom corner of the letter, you will see that the final form of the mem has a sharper corner. And when you see this sharper corner, you will know that this is the final form of the mem. And by the way, it'll appear only at the end of the end of the word, the final form of the mem. So you look at this sharp corner, and you will know that this is the final mem. If you don't see the sharp corner, you will know that it's a samech. The samech pronounces the sound sa, and the mem makes the sound ma. We have a few more. As you look at these two consonants, you will see that here on the right side, we have the letter tet, pronounces the sound ta. And then on the left side, we have the final mem, which we just saw, and we recognize that they too look very similar. Now, how do I distinguish between these two? Well, in this case, if you look at the letter tet, which has the sound ta, and you look at the top, you will see that there's a slight gap. Well, this slight gap will tell you that this is the letter ta. And in fact, if you look at the final mem, it looks significantly different, right? You have the sharp corner here, you don't have the sharp corner here, you have the gap here, you don't have the gap here. I think it's different enough where you see it a few times, you'll be able to recognize it. Then we move on to the letters tzadi and the letter ein. Now these do look very similar. So we do have to make a distinction between these two and recognize them and look at this very carefully so that we remember the difference. When you look at the letter tzadi, which by the way makes the sound tsa, like the letter letters ts, tsa, you will see that there is a line that goes to the right and up. Well, this line starts in the middle of the vertical line. And that will give away the fact that this is a tzadi. As you look at the opposing letter, which is an ein, which we pronounced based on the vowel that comes with it. We haven't seen this yet. We'll see that in the next session. But as you look at this ein, you see that it does not have this vertical line that goes up to the right top, beginning in the middle. And so because it doesn't have this line that begins in the middle, you know that this is the letter ein. Now, as you move forward, you see that there is an ein, which we just saw, by the way, and there's another letter that looks very similar to it, and this is the final form of the tzadi. It appears only at the end of the words, right? And so here, as you look at these two letters and you look at the final tzadi, you will recognize it by seeing that it goes below the line of the rest of the consonants. So it's going to be longer than the rest of the consonants. And by comparing this longer tzadi, final tzadi, to the shorter letter, you will know that the shorter one is the ein, even though it looks similar to the tzadi, and the longer one is the tzadi because it goes below the line of the rest of the consonants. Now we get to the letters sin and shin, and we already saw how similarly they look. So how do we make a distinction between these two? It's essentially the same letter, right? Except the dot is in a different place. Well, of course, you have to recognize where the dot is, and that's going to tell you which letter it is, but there is a way to help us. If you look at the letter Shin, the dot appears on the right side. So you can remember the statement, Shin is right. Why? Well, sin is wrong. Sin is wrong. In other words, it's not right. The dot appears on the left side. So on the Shin, the dot appears on the right side. So we say Shin is right. And then sin is wrong. The dot appears on the left side. It's not on the right side. So we're going to remember that if the dot is on the left side and the wrong side, then it's going to be a sin. If it appears on the right side, it's going to be a Shin. And I think that helps us remember which letter is which. Well, that brings us to the end of the alphabet, of the consonants. Of course, we're going to learn the vowels in the next session. But as you think about these 22 letters, these are the 22 letters that put together the entirety of the Old Testament. You now have the consonants with which God used different men to write the Bible that He has left for us over the period of a few thousand years, so that we can know what His plan is for our lives, what His plan is in regard to Him receiving the glory as He works through humanity. And because you know the consonants, you are now able to read the Old Testament. Can you do it as precisely and as exactly as you would with the vowels? Well, not yet. But we're going to learn that at the next session, and then you'll be able to read the entirety of the Old Testament with the consonants and with the vowels, so that you can go from start, Genesis 1:1, until the very end of the Old Testament. And we'll come back and we'll pick up with the vowels after this. But for now, please do learn the consonants.